Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review The Last of Us Season 1, Episode 8. So I think the first question that I think a lot of people will have is who the heck Alec was. So we come into this episode with characters who are in kind of David's group of things, and they're talking about Alec. So we would come to find that both Joel and Ellie had gone to the university in episodes before and had, instead of going and meeting up with fireflies, they met up with raiders instead. Joel had to go on and kill one of the raiders, as well as the raider going on and stabbing into Joel. We come to find out that that raider that had died was actually Alec. So that, of course, is who Alec is for some people that didn't know. Next, I would go on to start to more and more realize as every episode is to play out on this show that it feels like we are getting a lesser and lesser version of the game every time we go on and go into the show. And I kind of get it because like there's only so much that you can put into an episode. I get that, but and people would probably say it's like, well, yeah, like there's certain things that like they can obviously cut, but I feel that we're also just kind of missing certain action moments where there should actually be a lot more infected into this show, but instead they're being so much more focused on the story that they're just kind of cutting things. So it might give people all the more reason to want to check out the game over the show. And so I guess that's a real selling point for here. I would also thoroughly go on and state that we have a character in this episode whose name is James. James is actually played by a actor known as Troy Baker. Troy Baker, I would of course go on and know him from a lot of animated movies or certain video games of certain sorts. If anybody's to ever go on and play the Batman Arkham games, you would go to find that James is to kind of either do the voice of the Joker or do the voice of the Red Hood. And so, yeah, so that of course would be Troy Baker for me. Or also, you kind of randomly find him doing voices for Nathan Drake in Uncharted, or just certain other kind of random things that at some point I would have known him from, or I would of course have played the Saints Row games. I'm like, oh yeah, like Troy Baker, yeah. So, but also Troy Baker is to do the voice for Joel in the Last of Us video games, and that's like why he was actually here. And I was like, okay, great, cool. So that's a funny little Easter egg like thing, but it was kind of cool that Troy was in this show regardless. But so, anyways, with that said, what ends up happening in the show? Let's tee up this episode. So we come to find that Ellie is trying to take care of Joel, who of course is very sick because it seems like he's starting to get an infection from that sewing job that Ellie went on to do. So Ellie is to uh, start to run out of resources, and she's starting to realize that she needs to go out and start to try and hunt for food. So we have David's group of people that are to be seemingly religious people. They are having to go on and quote the Bible at certain moments here. And we come to find that David and James are to go on and eventually, at a certain portion of this episode, go on to find said deer that Ellie is to have kind of gone down here. And so they end up kind of making a bargain. And so this leads to David really wanting to go on and find both Ellie and Joel and kind of get their revenge. And so that's how everything just kind of plays out. And so, with that said, that's a very quick assessment of what actually happens in this episode. But yeah, but like really, to go on and go in more in depth, like I feel like there's a lot here that I can go on and say in spoilers that I feel like I can't say here. We also, by the end of this episode, are to seemingly have Joel that's kind of feeling better, or to the point where he really just has to be better. And so we're kind of see how that all plays out. And so other than that, no real like going back to prior episode or giving us any more moments of that. Like that is to just be gone and past, or we just have to kind of put things together in our own brains of what it all happened uh, for certain things that weren't set there. So, anyways, let's go on and let's quickly just double fire this bad boy up because I think it's about that time yet again to, of course, go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about the time I'm going to spoil this episode. So, we, at the very beginning of this episode, have David who is talking to his people and is quoting like Revelation, I think it's either 21 or 12. So David is to go on and talk about how there's no more sorrow, there's no more sadness, and this and that, while all of a sudden we have a girl, I believe, named Hannah, who is crying because of uh, the loss of her father. And so David is like, well, you know why I go on and I read this thing to you, and to force Hannah to kind of finish up uh, the part of the book, and like she doesn't even know the words, so David finishes it. And I think like David is probably, as well as probably a number of other people, are probably just kind of sick of whoever is to go on and actually like be crying and and have like their grief, because it's like, well, hey, like we've all lost somebody at this point, and to go on and continue to just kind of waste our tears on people who have died, because it just happens much more often now because of how just the thinning of the herd that we go into this show. So we have, after David is to go on and talk to Hannah, we then have David who is to talk to James and like ask about how much of a reserve or how much they have really left of food. And James is like, like it's looking pretty thin back there. We might have like a week, maybe 2 weeks. And so David's just like, okay. And so James is to state that he might have had someone say that there might be some deer like here or there, but like James can't really trust the word. And so Dave starts to walk off, and or James starts to walk off, and so David is to state, it's like, well, like I'm starting to sense a little bit of doubt here. And James is kind of looking at David, and it's like, well, like there's been people that have like lost so much. And David is looking at James, is like, well, like I didn't state them, like I'm looking at you. And James is like, well, like I still believe. And then he just kind of walks off. So because we come to find out further and further in this episode, like James is kind of tempted to uh, kind of have people whisper in his ear, or he's kind of tempted to do his own thing. And so, because the more and more they are to possibly bring people in, they realize that that is just another mouth to feed, and so on and so forth. And speaking of some mouths to feed, they're going to go through some creative ways to feed those mouths. So in this episode we will find. So we have David and we have James. It's like, okay, like how about we go on and just hope that we can find that deer, that magical deer that everyone was talking about. So Ellie goes on to kind of look over Joel, and Joel is kind of very out of it. He's kind of mostly just kind of sleeping. It seems that Ellie is to have to go on and kind of force feed Joel like certain things with water, or just kind of like this little bit of food that she has left. So Ellie realizes that she's going to have to go on and kind of fend for her food. So Ellie goes on to get this rifle and is to go outside, and she's kind of looking around. So Ellie goes on and at first is to find this rabbit, and so Ellie is to try to get in position for the rabbit, and she kind of falls on her face and gets a face full of snow. Ellie then goes on to realize that I guess the bunny kind of ran off. So Ellie is to now just kind of look around and see if she can find anything, and she luckily ends up finding a deer. So Ellie goes on to shoot said deer, and then the deer kind of like prattles off, and he's like, "Seriously, come on." So we then find both David and James, who end up finding a deer, and it's down. And David's like, "Well, hey, maybe we can get away with like stealing this deer." And whoever it was to kind of kill this initially. Maybe like we've gotten this just in time. We then find that Ellie is to make her way back to her deer that she shot, so that's like the connection between these people. So we have David that's like, whoa, 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 because like they drop their guns because Ellie has kind of got the drop on him. So David is like, well, hey, how about we make a bargain? How about we go on and like we have a group to feed, and so Ellie's like, well, hey, do you guys have medication? And like specifically for infections, because she's like, well, hey, I'll give you half the meat if you give me the medication. So, and she tells like James to kind of to run off and get it. So David is to go on and kind of tell like James where to go and what to do, and James is kind of looking at David, and David's like, well, this isn't code that I'm giving you, like stating that like he's not trying to like make up something uh that is to be some kind of Morse code of some kind to tell James to like, okay, bring reinforcements and kill this girl. No, uh, David is like, just go on and just do what I said. Simply do what I said. So James goes off, and so David is like, well, hey, like it's kind of getting cold in here. How about we go on and kind of bring this deer by the fire, and we can just kind of get warm to wait for this medication. So Ellie is to have also gone on and tell David that she's in a group, and I'm like, yeah, that's actually pretty smart to try to figure out a way to like talk to David and tell him it's like, well, yeah, we have just as many numbers as you do, but David is to kind of just quickly realize that it's probably just her and this other guy. So David is to go on and talk to Ellie. It's like, well, hey, like if you guys want, like you guys can be here and everything's wonderful, yada yada yada. So, because we'll come to find out that David is to be living by this resort that isn't exactly easily on a map. So, so when James comes back, we have him kind of like drop the medication over to Ellie. Then Ellie takes the medication and she runs off. So and the guys just kind of take the deer with them. So we have, by the time both David and James make their way uh, to the people with this deer, we have all of a sudden a guy who has chopped up quite a bit of meat, and they're going on and they're looking at this guy. It's like, well, hey, like, what is this meat? Where did it come from? And the guy tells him, yeah, it's venison. And they're just like, okay, all right, well, like, we'll just accept that then. And so they're like, okay, more meat, and so they start putting it into the things, the bowls, it seems. So we have David and James. They're kind of they're making bowls and so on and so forth. And we have at one moment where like Hannah is to kind of be upset with David as uh, David is to talk to Hannah as if like, well, hey, uh, well, hey, like you're gonna have like a father here, and like shouldn't you be nice to your father? So like we have like that whole thing with like Hannah there, where like it feels that David is trying to discipline Hannah because maybe he's just tired of her crap. I don't know. We'll figure that out. So if anything, I wouldn't go on and frickin' trust uh, any of these people because I'd be like, dude, like they're freaking cannibals. Like, never, if you ever go on to find anybody from this location, never accept them here because they're freaking cannibals. Because come to find out, I guess in a plethora of different like shows and movies that I've ever gone on and seen, like there'd be people that I guess would be cannibals, and they would go on to state it's like, well, like once you start to eat human flesh, like it's an addiction because it's the best meat you've ever tasted, and this and that, and I'm like, yeah, that's freaking weird. But so like I guess that's what they state in those weird, goofy things. So we go on to have David after their meal of meat. David and James should bring in reinforcements to have them go on and try to track where Ellie and Joel are. So David is to go on and tell his reinforcements, and James is one of them, like, well, hey, like make sure like you keep her alive, and because David has his own agenda. So we have Ellie that is to kind of reel up the garage door on her garage in this house, and she's kind of feeding this horse some snow, so that way at least it can kind of have something to consume here. So Ellie's just kind of looking around, and I believe this is the kind of the point where she starts to realize that somebody's coming. So Ellie runs off to see Joel and try to wake him up as best she can. And so Ellie tells Joel that there's going to be some people coming, and they're going to probably want to try and kill Joel. So Ellie goes on and is to give him a knife and is to tell him like, well, hey, like you need to kill these guys. And so Ellie is gonna try to like kind of like go onto this horse and try to lead them away. So we have Ellie that gets on the horse and is to try to ride off, and she all of a sudden sees this whole group of guys. She's like, "Hey guys, I'm over here." So she starts to shoot some of them, and then she starts to ride off on the horse. We have James who goes on to shoot the horse down, and then Ellie, of course, falls. So we have James that gets there, and some of the guys, and they're like, "Hey, shoot her, kill her now." and we have David who kind of fires in the air. It's like no, 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 not so fast. So David is to want to go and take Ellie, and he tells the guys like, well, hey, like go on and go from house to house, try to find this guy. So David goes on to take Ellie and is to kind of chain her up. So we have, of course, one guy who is to make it to the place where Joel is at, and Ellie had kind of moved this furniture to kind of block this room and whatever have you. So Joel is hearing the sound of moving furniture and hearing steps, so he's like, okay, like somebody's coming. So when this guy gets down to where Joel is, like we see that Joel is not in his bed, and so this guy is kind of just looking around, and we have Joel coming up from behind this guy and stabbing into him. So like Joel is really trying to go on and defend himself. So Joel goes on to get more of these guys as we have, I think, Josiah, who is to walk in to getting hit with a rifle in the face and knocked out. So Joel then is to go on and start to like torture these guys for information. It's like, well, hey, like tell me on the map where these guys took Ellie. And so the guy states, well, like this isn't so easy to just find on a map because it's a resort and it's not listed on the map. So the guy's just like, hey, point where it is. So, and Joel is going on and telling this guy, it's like, you better point this out and point it out correctly and be the exact same thing that this other guy is going to point out. And so the guy points it out with this knife in his mouth. And so Joel immediately goes on to kill that guy after kind of putting a knife in his leg and torturing him and whatever. So the other guy's like, well, hey, man, I'm not telling you nothing. And Joel's like, well, that's good because I'm going to trust that guy's answer anyways. And so he kills the other guy. So Ellie goes on to talk to David. And so David, it seems to have come to find out, instead of relying on the word of God and understanding that when the world ended, that David should really take God's word into full consideration, but instead David started to look at uh, the cordyceps, the infected, and was to start to understand them more and start to believe in what they were doing more. And so David is starting to take what they are doing and understanding it. Bizarrely enough, to even the point of them having on the other cage of things an ear and some skin just left in the other cage. And so we had David that was to go on and give Ellie this bowl of food, and she immediately kicks it away because she's like, oh my god, like you're eating people? Like you're eating other people? And so David is like, well, yes, but like the meal that I gave you was deer meat, and I was honest about that. So Ellie goes on and kicks it, and so David is to want to go on and make a bargain with Ellie because we've just consistently come to bargain in this episode. David is to go on and state that if Ellie will stay here because he feels that him and her are kind of one and the same, and that like they have certain things about one another, like they're survivors and whatever. So David is a state that if Ellie stays here with him, that David will tell his men to no longer look for Joel. And so, like, this moment here goes on to remind me of, like, Ghostbusters 2, when Dana Barrett is talking to Janish, the painter guy that Dana kind of works under for that sequel movie. And we have, of course, like Janish, who's kind of offering Dana like cars, free parking, uh, the perks of being the mother of a living god and stuff like that. And Dana's like, "Oh, I can learn," and like that's kind of what we see here is kind of coming from Ghostbusters 2, bizarrely as a reference from that. Uh, Not word for word, but it seemed very similar. So Ellie's just seemed to go on at first and is to kind of play along and just kind of get close to David, to then just try and go on and bite him on the hand and then break his fingers. And so David is like, well, like, you won't even want to know what I'm going to go on and tell my men now. And Ellie's telling David, it's like, tell him Ellie. And David's like, what? And Ellie's like, tell them Ellie had just broke your fingers and bit you. And so David just storms off. So we have Ellie that's trying to figure out how to adjust this cage. And so we start to find that Joel is kind of making his way to possibly where Ellie is. So Ellie goes on to uh, like, she tried to get the keys from David before when she bit him and broke his fingers, but that failed. So we then have David and James who are kind of grabbing onto Ellie, and they want to chop her up for a good old meat stew. So when David is to bring the cleaver right next to Ellie's head, we have Ellie that grabs this cleaver and is to put the cleaver right into James's neck and killing off James. So no Troy Baker after this episode because he's dead now, unless they try to figure out a way to bring him back. I don't think so. Anyways, so when Ellie kills James and is to run off, we then have David that is kind of firing these shots, but I assumed he wasn't going to kill Ellie anyways because he wants to go on and he wants to use her. So Ellie is now in this place and she's kind of waiting for David. She's gonna try and go on and put on a good fight here. The one thing that he didn't state in the teeing up part of this or whatever is, like, it's really interesting, like how we went from the last episode, which is kind of a big Ellie story, to now again in this episode being a big Ellie story, to the point of us seemingly going into a route in the future where it's going to be seemingly more about Ellie, uh, a lot more about Ellie. But I guess that does make sense because we did get like some like origin stuff and all those kinds of things of either uh, Joel or the infection and like the origin stuff of that. So it kind of makes sense to kind of give the technically origin stuff or the backstories of Ellie here, which makes sense. Anyways, so but I like how we get into a much more darker, uh, like losing of innocence, really here, or maybe losing of sanity for maybe Ellie, where she is kind of just traumatized or scarred by this moment, but they have to just continue to push on because that's the world they live in now. So Ellie is going on and just kind of waiting for David, as David is kind of like taunting Ellie. So Ellie is to go on and have this kind of this piece that is kind of to have this kind of ash on the end of it, and she tries to go on and chuck this to hopefully hit David, but it hits this corner of this place instead and is starting to light this place on fire. So David and Ellie are continuing to talk, and so like David is really just stating how he's probably going to own Ellie or discipline her, and so on and so forth. So we have David and we have Ellie who get some pretty good licks in of one another, and because Ellie has this knife and David goes on and also has his attack, so both of them kind of strike at the same time. And then David goes on to kind of go and kind of push Ellie aside, and is to kind of put her hands up, and uh, like how like certain women will like not go so easily and do this so easily, kind of stating that David will probably take advantage of Ellie. And so we come to find that Ellie will be able to kind of counter from this, break away from this, and then go on and just continue to just stab into David multiple times, like as if she's like just going to town, stab it, stab it, stab. And like she stabs into him a plethora of different times, realizing that this is the point now where this character has kind of lost their innocence, but also is to have lost their possible sanity, to where we can almost start to see that like Joel losing his daughter in the beginning of this was like his first thing of starting to go further and further uh, down that like I don't really care, like my daughter is gone, like the one thing that I had in this world is now gone. And like we start to see that Ellie is to be driven further into instead of cracking wise and cracking jokes, uh, she is to start to see the now ugly side of this new world, and like she is now just kind of traumatized by that. So when Ellie now is to make it out of this place that is currently burning down, she bumps into somebody, and that ends up being Joel, and she doesn't realize it at first. And so Joel is to go on and be like, wait a minute, wait, it's me, I'm here. It's like, I'm here. And so Joel goes on and takes off his coat and gives it to Ellie, and they just kind of head their way off. And that's how we kind of wrap up this episode. So, yeah. Again, it was actually it was a great episode, but it was just like we've kind of gotten these same kind of episodes consistently. Um, where yeah, some of them might have been less well received than others, but yeah. So and they would have to go on and have these like kind of little cliffhanger, or they would go on to have these like little moments where it's like, well, I guess that has to forcefully make up for the fact that there was a lot of nothing going on in this episode. Uh, but yeah, but this overall was like really interesting, and really just great to just kind of make our way through. So with that said, I think I'm just going to go on and get out of here. Let me know in the comments below how you felt about this episode. I know a lot of people may not go on and watch the whole entire thing, but hey, if you do, I appreciate it. I really do. And for those of you that did, thanks. I really do appreciate it. But anyways, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, buddy. Bye, buddy.